Coming up on Arirang News, South Korea warns the North that it'll be the end of the regime if it were to launch a nuclear attack against Seoul or Washington. This responding to Pyongyang's threats against the U.S. nuclear submarine making port in South Korea. The South Korean government and the ruling party agreed to provide greater tax benefits for companies returning home from their offshore operations as they discuss this year's tax code revision aimed at boosting the economy. One of South Korea's largest and most popular summer events, Boryeong Mud Festival, kicks off. Tonight, we go there where many are cooling off the heat while soaked in mud. Good evening. It's 9 p.m. here in Seoul. Thank you for joining us on Arirang News. We begin with a strong warning to the North by South Korea's Defense Ministry. It says it'll be the end of the regime if it were to launch any nuclear attack. This in response to Pyongyang's threats against the U.S. nuclear submarine arriving in the South. Our Lee Soo-jin reports.
South Korea's defense ministry responded to North Korea's warning of nuclear retaliation with a warning of its own on Friday. The ministry said that just as South Korea and the U.S. made it clear during the NCG meeting, North Korea will face an immediate, overwhelming, and decisive response in the event of any North Korean nuclear attack against the alliance that will result in the end of the North Korean regime. North Korea has heavily criticized the docking of the USS Kentucky, a nuclear-capable strategic submarine in South Korea, and the launch of the South Korea-U.S. Nuclear Consultative Group as a blatant and direct nuclear threat. North Korea's Defense Minister Kang Sun-nam, in a press statement released by North Korea's state-run Korea Central News Agency on Thursday, called the situation the most serious stage of the U.S. planning and executing a nuclear strike against DPRK. He added that the DPRK's law on nuclear force allows them to take a necessary course of action when it is clear that a nuclear weapons attack on the country has been carried or is imminent. Kang emphasized that the deployment of strategic weapons such as the nuclear-capable submarine falls under the conditions of North Korea's nuclear doctrine that allows the use of nuclear weapons in retaliation. He also said that using military force against North Korea will lead to disastrous consequences for both South Korea and the United States. The USS Kentucky arrived in the southeastern port city of Busan on Tuesday, the first port call from a U.S. ballistic missile submarine in Korea in 40 years. On the same day, the first meeting of the South Korea-U.S. Nuclear Consultative Group was held in Seoul. The Pentagon responded to the statement on the previous day, saying that the submarine's port call to Busan was a planned military exercise stemming from South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol's visit to Washington in April, emphasizing that the move was part of its commitment to extended deterrence in response to North Korea's continued nuclear threats. The port visit was also referred to as a representation of South Korea and the U.S.'s ironclad commitment to defense. The Pentagon also said that South Korea and the U.S.'s efforts to protect their citizens from North Korean nuclear threats do not violate UN Security Council resolutions, unlike North Korea's nuclear provocations. Lee Soo-jin, Arirang News.
Top nuclear delegates representing South Korea and the U.S. met in Tokyo today and agreed to work together to cut off illicit funding for North Korea's missile development. They also decided to communicate more with China so that it can play its constructive role. Our foreign affairs correspondent Bae Eun-ji has more.
Following the recent series of ballistic missile launches from North Korea, South Korea's top nuclear envoy Kim Gun held a meeting with his American counterpart Sung Kim in Tokyo, where they strongly condemned the regime's nuclear threats that have been raising tensions on the peninsula. Seoul's foreign ministry said the two sides decided to strengthen cooperation to cut off funding for Pyongyang's ballistic missile and weapons programs, such as illicit cyber activities, overseas workers, and illegal ship-to-ship transfers. The two officials also said they will continue to communicate with China, a permanent member of the UN Security Council, to encourage Beijing to play what they called a responsible and constructive role. Friday's meeting comes a day after the officials met for a trilateral meeting with their Japanese counterpart, Takehiro Funakoshi. The three reaffirmed their commitment to achieving denuclearization on the Korean Peninsula.
We will strengthen our close communication and coordination to bring North Korea back to the path to denuclearization.
One expert told Arirang News that because of the COVID-19 situation and the economic sanctions on North Korea, illicit cyber activity involving IT workers is one of the very few ways for the regime to find hard currency. He also said that Seoul and Washington's efforts to cut off these activities have so far been working.
So South Korea and United States detected this whole situation and tried to block all those the illegal activity of the North Korea, and it's quite successful so far. And because this is a very important route to get the fund for the North Korean regime, especially for the Kim Jong-un, for the developing nuclear missiles.
In April, South Korea and the U.S. simultaneously slapped sanctions on a North Korean banker tied with the North's illicit cyber activities, making it the first time that the two countries have both simultaneously imposed sanctions on the same individual in the cyber field. 배은지, Arirang News.
The U.S. continues to look into the whereabouts of Travis King, an American soldier who has recently crossed the border into North Korea. The Pentagon says it still hasn't heard anything from the regime about the incident. Choi Min-jung with more.
Washington is continuing to work toward the safe return of the U.S. service member Travis King, who defected into North Korea earlier this week. But despite such efforts, the Pentagon on Thursday said it was unable to obtain any information about King's whereabouts or well-being.
We don't know his condition. We don't know where he's being held. We don't know the status of his health.
The Pentagon spokesperson said the U.S. has not heard any communication or correspondence from North Korea about this incident.
There is no sign of engagement from the North Koreans. We've always wanted to ensure that there is military-to-military cooperation and communication, but sadly, there's not on the North Korean side.
North Korea has remained silent about King. In the past, North Korea state media has reported on the detention of U.S. nationals. The 23-year-old American soldier stationed in South Korea fled across the inter-Korean border into North Korea on Tuesday, while on a group tour of the joint security area located along the demilitarized zone that separates the two Koreas. The Pentagon said the U.S. Army has launched an investigation into this incident, which is being led by its counterintelligence personnel in coordination with U.S. Forces Korea. It was again reiterated that its key priority is to bring King home. Choi Min-jung, Arirang News.
South Korea's exports continue to face a challenge following sluggish chip shipments and a continued weakness in China-bound exports. According to the Korea Customs Service, exports for the first 20 days of July were valued at around $31.2 billion, down more than 15% compared to a year ago. Now, should this trend continue for the rest of the month, it'll mark the 10th consecutive monthly fall in overseas shipments. The Trade Ministry said on Friday that exports to China and ASEAN nations dropped over 20% on-year in the first half of the year. On the other hand, shipments to the U.S. and EU saw a slight increase. China-bound exports dropped mainly in the IT sector, such as chips and displays, while car exports drove the rising shipments to the U.S. and EU. South Korea is now back on Japan's so-called whitelist of trusted trading partners 4 years after it was removed. Japan's public broadcaster NHK reported that the government there had finalized the process of reinstating Korea as a Group A nation on its whitelist, and the resultant preferential export treatment went into effect as of Friday. This follows a series of recent summits between the leaders of South Korea and Japan. Seoul restored Tokyo to its list of preferred trading partners back in April in response to Japan removing export curbs on 3 key materials for semiconductor and display manufacturing. The trade dispute was fueled by a 2019 court ruling in South Korea ordering Japanese companies to compensate victims of forced labor before and during World War II. South Korea's production prices fell for the 3rd month in a row in June, suggesting an easing of inflation in the near future. According to the Bank of Korea this Friday, the country's production price index, an indicator of future inflation, dropped 0.2% on month. The trend comes amid lower prices for industrial products such as petroleum, chemicals, and basic metal products, despite jumps in electricity and gas prices. However, it remains uncertain whether the trend will continue, as prices of agricultural products are expected to rise this month amid the recent torrential downpours. The government and the ruling party agreed to provide greater tax benefits for companies returning home from their offshore operations as they discussed this year's tax code revision aimed at boosting the economy. More tax benefits are also in store for employees of small and medium-sized businesses. Our Lee Si-hoo has the details.
The ruling People Power Party and the government held a meeting to discuss new tax law changes for 2023 and said there will be expanded benefits for companies that located production facilities overseas but have since reshored to South Korea. This was announced by the PPP on Friday based on the results of the meeting held 2 days ago. Chief Policymaker Park Tae-chul, the chair of the National Assembly Strategy and Finance Committee, PPP Representative Yoo Sung-gul, and officials from the Ministry of Finance participated in the meeting. The participants recommended the government extend the tax reduction periods for reshoring companies to 10 years, up from the current 7 years. At the moment, companies can receive a 100% income and corporate tax exemption for the first 5 years after their return, followed by a 50% reduction for the next 2 years. The new plan expands the 100% exemption to 7 years and 50% for the following 3 years. The PPP also called for income tax reductions for young people working at small and medium-sized businesses and small restaurants, business owners, farmers and fishermen, among others, in need of help after struggling financially during the pandemic. The party noted that the government said it would reflect on such requests in its new tax changes. The party and the government will also double the current limits on non-taxable income for maternity and childcare benefits from the current 100,000 Korean won to 200,000 Korean won, or around $156. This is to combat the low birth rate, aging society, and the declining population in rural areas, the party explained. They also agreed that South Korea's economy will improve in the second half of the year, but acknowledged that active tax administration is needed amid the uncertain global economic situation and high inflation and interest rates. In addition, the PPP vowed that it would do its utmost best to, quote, reignite the growth engine of South Korea's economy and lead the nation into taking a new leap forward. Lee Si-hoo, Arirang News.
The nation's finance ministry says it'll do all it can to swiftly restore the damage caused by the recent heavy rain. Moon Hae-ryun has the details of this financial support plan.
The monsoon season, which has devastated the country for the past few weeks, caused significant damage to infrastructure, farmland and residential areas. Finance Minister Chu Kyung-ho addressed these problems and laid out a plan to support those affected at an emergency ministerial meeting on Friday. With more than 17,000 people being displaced from their homes due to heavy rain and over 2,000 still unable to return to their homes, the government will be using the budget set aside for natural disasters to fund the restoration of residential areas. Tax support for those affected will also be provided, such as a temporary extension of tax payment deadlines. Farmland was also heavily damaged in the downpours. Over 340 square kilometers of farmland was submerged in water, 6 times more than during last year's monsoon rain. For scale, this is the equivalent of nearly 50,000 soccer fields.
The government will come up with a sufficient compensation plan as quickly as possible by evaluating the damage and actively taking suggestions from those on site.
The plan includes funding for restoration to compensate for damaged crops and equipment, as well as for livestock killed in the flooding. Farmers affected will also be able to claim insurance within a month of claiming for their crops and land. And as a consequence of the flooding, prices of food products such as lettuce and chicken are expected to become increasingly unstable. The government will attempt to stabilize the supply chain by funding the replantation of vegetables in greenhouses. A tariff rate quota will also be introduced for 30,000 tons of chicken by August, along with the importation of 5 million fertilized chicken eggs and funding of around $62 million to increase stocks of chicks. Furthermore, people will be able to enjoy up to 30% discounted prices for products affected by the rainfall until the supply chain has been stabilized. 문혜련, Arirang News.
Korea's second moon mission following its lunar orbiter Danuri is a lunar lander that will be launched in 2032. Now this latest ambition begins with the making of next-generation launch vehicles to take that lander to the moon. Our Chung Eun-ju has more.
South Korea plans to launch 3 next-generation space launch vehicles from 2030. After 2 preliminary launches in 2030 and 2031, the country hopes to send a lunar lander to the moon's surface in 2032. The next-generation SLV will be more than 5 meters taller than the Nuri space rocket's 47.5 meters and also equipped with more powerful engines. Unlike Nuri, which has 4 75-ton engines in its first stage booster, the new SLV will be equipped with 5 100-ton engines. Nuri's second stage also uses a single 75-ton engine, but the new rocket will be equipped with 2 10-ton engines in its second stage. Based on a target altitude of 700 kilometers for its first launch, Nuri can carry a 1.9-ton satellite into Earth's orbit. The SLV's thrust-to-weight ratio is 3 times that of Nuri's maximum, enabling it to carry a payload of 1.8 tons into a lunar orbit, which is 380,000 kilometers away from Earth. The next-generation rocket also has improved engine efficiency by utilizing a different type of turbopump, which is used to inject fuel and oxidizer into a combustion chamber. Nuri emitted the gas used to run its turbopump as exhaust, but the next-generation launch vehicle recycles it through its engines.
Combustion occurs to operate the pump, but there's still the possibility for heat generation after that. It would be more advantageous in generating momentum to recover the remaining heat and send it to the combustion chamber again, rather than disposing of it.
The Ministry of Science and ICT plans to appoint a manager for the SLV project by next month. It also plans to select a private systems integration company to participate in the project from the initial stages of development in October. Chung Eun-ju, Arirang News.
In Ukraine, the southern city of Odesa has come under intense air assaults by Russia in recent days, following Moscow pulling out of Ukraine grain deal. Kyiv says Russia has been striking infrastructure associated with grain exports. Lee Seung-jae has the latest.
Ukraine is struggling to defend its southern city of Odesa following 3 consecutive nights of attacks. According to Ukrainian Air Force, it destroyed just 5 of 19 cruise missiles overnight into Thursday, a far lower success rate compared to previous attacks targeting Kyiv. Ukrainian officials say it's due to less advanced defense systems operating in the southern regions of the country. The Russian Defense Ministry says these strikes were retaliation for the Ukraine's attack on the Crimean Bridge earlier this week, adding it targeted facilities linked with Ukraine's seaborne attack drones. However, Ukraine has refuted the claims, saying Moscow is targeting civilian infrastructure associated with grain exports, especially as it refused to renew its grains export agreement on Monday. Among the buildings damaged in the attack on Odesa was the Chinese Consulate General. A Ukrainian Foreign Ministry spokesperson said it's assessing the extent of the damage and offering any assistance needed. And according to UN spokesperson Stefan Dujarric, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has strongly condemned the sustained attack on Odesa. The spokesperson added that the attacks have consequences well beyond Ukraine, as a negative impact on global wheat and corn prices is already being seen. Meanwhile, the U.S. sanctioned more than 120 Russian and Kyrgyzstan firms on Thursday for what it said were their contributions to Russia's war on Ukraine. The U.S. State Department said the latest move would further cut off Russia's access to critical raw and manufactured materials, which finance the production of weapons. Also included in the list of those sanctioned is a North Korean who supported the Wagner Group by helping with the shipping of weapons to the mercenary group. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
Today is Chungbok in Korea, one of the 3 hottest days of the year. With heat wave alerts issued across the country, our cultural correspondent Song Yu-jin shows us one of the ways to beat the heat.
Boryeong. Millions gather in summer at the city's Daecheon beach for the now famous Mud Festival. The festival originally started small in 1998 as part of the city's efforts to promote its mud-related businesses like cosmetics. Boryeong sea mud is renowned for being rich in minerals that are great for the skin. But over the years, it's grown into one of the most well-known and cherished summer festivals in Korea, attracting more than 46 million people over the past 25 years. And it's back at full scale for the first time since 2019, before the pandemic.
This year, we extended the festival period from 10 days to 17 so that more people can stop by and enjoy our festival.
All of its regular attractions are back, like this giant mud pool where you can dance and have a mud fight.
So besides the giant mud pool, there are a lot of ways to enjoy the mud here, like this. But this is one of the many ways to do so.
One highlight this year is the newly added mud barbecue, where people hang onto a rotating pole, trying not to fall into the mud pool. Festival goers from near and far are brimming with excitement.
Our summer vacation just started and we found that the Boryeong Mud Festival starts today, so we headed over here. I'm so excited because there's tons of hands-on experiences to enjoy.
It was a great time. It's a lot of fun. We came here yesterday and we went on the beach and saw stuff there, and now we're doing the mud stuff, and then later on it'll be the music. It'll be a great time.
To make it enjoyable for all, the size of the family zone for kids has expanded, and for the first time, there's a mud pool for dogs. If you're into mud cosmetics, you can try out the mud massage. But all this becomes even better with some great music. EDM performances will be held 3 to 4 times a day, as well as K-pop and DJ concerts. This year's Boryeong Mud Festival will greet visitors until August 6th. Interpretation services are available in English, Chinese, and Japanese. So, if you're looking for some muddy fun this summer, Boryeong is the place to be. 송유진, Arirang News, Boryeong.
The track G by Girls' Generation has been ranked #1 on Rolling Stone magazine's list of the 100 greatest songs in the history of K-pop music. Rolling Stone says that G, which was first released in 2009, demonstrates how the ecstasy of describing inexplicable love can be translated through pop music. Candy by H.O.T. came in second, followed by Good Day by IU and Spring Day by BTS. Girls' Generation's agency SM Entertainment is one of the biggest entertainment companies in the K-pop industry and has contributed to the list the most with 14 songs, including Blackpink's Turuturu and Big Bang's Haru Haru.
This weekend is forecast to be mostly wet and humid. Another monsoonal rain front will enter the country around tomorrow daytime. This round of rain will contain heavy downpours as well as thunder and lightning. Expect rain to continue until early next week. As for the amount of rainfall, northern Gyeonggi-do province and Jeju Island will see heavy rain of up to 150 millimeters. The Seoul metropolitan area and Gangwon-do province will see up to 100. Some regions may see local downpours of 30 to 60 millimeters. Consecutive days of heavy rain may lead to more flash floods and landslides. Please take extra precautions. Morning temperatures will be a couple degrees higher tomorrow. Seoul will start off at 25 degrees Celsius. Rainy spells will dominate for the daytime. Highs in Seoul will get up to 32, Gwangju 27, Daegu and Gyeongju will be topping out at 30 degrees. The capital region will see showers coming and going until next Wednesday. Have a great weekend, and here are the weather conditions around the world.
That is all for this Friday night newscast. Thank you for watching. Hope everyone has a great weekend and a good night.